The whiskey-stained letter trembled in Willa Brennan's gloved hands as she stepped off the stagecoach into the blistering Arizona sun, reading once more the words that had brought her 2,000 miles from Boston to Fort Bowie in the summer of 1872. Fort Bowie sprawled before her like a collection of sun-bleached bones scattered across the desert floor. Adobe buildings huddled together against the relentless heat, their walls cracked and weathered. Soldiers in dusty blue uniforms moved between structures with the slow determination of men who had learned not to fight the sun. Beyond the fort, mountains rose like jagged teeth against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. This was the edge of civilization. And Willa had come here with 3 trunks of books, a teaching certificate from the Boston Female Academy, and absolutely nowhere else to go. "Miss Brennan!" A portly man in a sweat-stained suit approached, removing his hat to reveal a sunburned scalp. "I'm Harold Finch, head of the school board. We received your letter accepting the teaching position." Willa straightened her spine, refusing to let him see how the heat was already making her corset feel like an instrument of torture. "Mr. Finch, I am pleased to make your acquaintance." His eyes traveled over her traveling dress, lingering on the neat rows of buttons and the books visible in her open carpet bag. Something flickered across his face that might have been doubt. "Well, let me show you to your quarters. We have a small room behind the schoolhouse. Nothing fancy, but it should suffice." As they walked through the dusty streets, soldiers and civilians alike stopped to stare. Willa kept her chin high, though she could hear the whispers following in her wake like tumbleweeds. "Boston educated, they say. Speaks 3 languages, I heard. Too refined for this place. She will not last a month." The schoolhouse was a simple adobe structure with a pitched roof and 4 small windows. Inside, rough-hewn benches faced a blackboard that had seen better days. Her quarters were indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. The books would have to stay stacked in the corner. "Classes start Monday," Finch said, hovering in the doorway. "I should warn you, Miss Brennan, the children here are not like the pupils you may have encountered in Boston. Many come from rough circumstances. Their parents are soldiers, traders, ranchers. They may not appreciate your more refined methods of instruction." "Education is education, Mr. Finch," Willa replied firmly. "Children deserve the best instruction regardless of their circumstances." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Yes, well, there is also the matter of your salary. $20 a month, as agreed. However, the board has asked me to convey that they expect you to conduct yourself with the utmost propriety. A schoolteacher must be above reproach. No fraternizing with soldiers or trappers, no visits to the saloon. Church attendance is mandatory." "I understand perfectly." After he left, Willa sat on the bed and allowed herself one moment of uncertainty. The room smelled of dust and old adobe. Through the thin walls, she could hear Spanish being spoken, chickens clucking, a baby crying. This was nothing like the neat brownstone in Boston where she had grown up, where her father's library had held 1,000 books, and her mother's parlor had hosted literary salons. But her father was dead. His debts had consumed everything, and her mother had remarried a man who made it clear there was no place for a 22-year-old stepdaughter in his household. Teaching was one of the few respectable professions available to an unmarried woman, and Fort Bowie had been desperate enough to hire someone sight unseen. She unpacked her books first: Shakespeare, Whitman, Thoreau, volumes of history and mathematics and natural philosophy. They were her most precious possessions, and she arranged them carefully against the wall like old friends. Sunday morning, she attended services in the small chapel. The other women of Fort Bowie examined her with frank curiosity. Their faces were weathered by sun and hardship, their hands rough from work. They wore simple calico dresses, while Willa's silk traveling dress, though 3 years old and carefully mended, marked her as different. "You are the new teacher," said a woman with graying hair and kind eyes. "I am Martha Hayes. My husband runs the trading post." "Willa Brennan, I'm pleased to meet you." "You have come a long way." Martha's gaze was shrewd but not unkind. "Boston, they say?" "Yes, madam." "That is quite a change." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "I hope you will not take offense, Miss Brennan, but there has been talk. Some folks think you might be too educated for frontier life, too refined. They worry you would not understand our ways." Willa felt heat rise in her cheeks, and it had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "I assure you, Mrs. Hayes, I'm quite capable of adapting to new circumstances." "I am sure you are, dear. But you should know what you are up against. Not everyone is pleased about your appointment. There were women here who wanted the position, women who have been here longer and understand frontier life." After services, Willa overheard the conversation that would set the course of everything to follow. A group of men had gathered in the shade of the trading post, passing around a flask. She recognized Harold Finch among them, along with several soldiers and civilians. "Too educated by half," one man was saying. "What do children in Fort Bowie need with Shakespeare and Latin? They need to know how to shoot straight and work hard." "She is pretty enough," another commented with a leer. "But that is the problem, is it not? A woman that educated would never make a proper frontier wife. She would have her nose in a book when she should be cooking dinner." "My wife says she brought 3 trunks of books," Finch added. 3 trunks. Can you imagine? A woman should not have that many ideas in her head. It is not natural. Willa's hands clenched around her prayer book, but she forced herself to walk past without reacting. Let them underestimate her. She would prove herself through her work. Monday morning, she arrived at the schoolhouse before dawn to prepare. 17 children showed up, ranging in age from 6 to 14. They stared at her with frank curiosity as she introduced herself and outlined her expectations. The first week was brutal. The children tested her constantly, speaking out of turn, refusing to complete assignments, the older boys particularly resistant to taking instruction from a woman they clearly considered an outsider. The heat was relentless, turning the schoolroom into an oven by midday. Willa's dresses were soaked through with perspiration by noon, but she refused to show weakness. Friday afternoon, she dismissed class and was wiping down the blackboard when the door opened. She turned, expecting a parent, and found herself facing a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained the seams of his buckskin shirt. His hair was dark brown and hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of beard growth. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling light brown that seemed to see straight through her. "Help you?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite her suddenly racing heart. "Name is Marcus Norwood," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "I trap and hunt in the mountains north of here. Come down for supplies every few months." He stepped inside, and she could see the powerful muscles of his arms and chest beneath the worn buckskin. This was a man who had been forged by the wilderness itself. "Heard there was a new teacher. Thought I would introduce myself." "Miss Brennan," she said, extending her hand formally. His hand engulfed hers, calloused and strong, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Brennan." His eyes traveled over the books stacked on her desk, lingering on the titles. "That is quite a collection. I believe in the value of a comprehensive education." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his rugged features. "I'm sure you do. Can you read all of those?" She bristled at the implied condescension. "Of course I can read them. I have university-level training in literature, mathematics, natural philosophy, history, and Latin." "Latin?" He picked up one of the books, handling it with unexpected care. His fingers were thick and scarred, the hands of a man who worked with traps and knives and rifles. Yet he opened the book gently, as if it were something precious. "Never learned to read much myself. Can make out enough to get by, but nothing fancy." Willa felt her irritation deflate, replaced by surprise. "You never attended school?" "My pa died when I was 8. My ma needed me to work. By the time I was 12, I was trapping with the mountain men. Been living in the wilderness most of my life." He set the book down carefully. "But I have always wondered what was in books like these. What makes a person cross a whole continent just to teach in a place like Fort Bowie?" The question was more perceptive than she had expected. She found herself answering honestly. "Necessity. My father died with significant debts. My mother remarried. I needed employment, and Fort Bowie needed a teacher." "So you ran away?" "I would not characterize it as running," she said stiffly. "No? What would you call it then?" But his tone was not mocking, merely curious. "I would call it making the best of difficult circumstances. Not all of us have the luxury of choosing our path in life, Mr. Norwood. He studied her for a long moment, those light brown eyes far too knowing. No, I suppose we do not. Well, Miss Brennan, I hope Fort Bowie treats you well. It is a hard place, but there are good people here if you give them a chance. I intend to do exactly that. After he left, Willa found herself staring at the door, her heart still beating faster than it should. Marcus Norwood was unlike any man she had encountered in Boston's refined drawing rooms. He was raw power and wilderness barely contained in human form, all hard muscle and quiet confidence. And yet he had handled her books with reverence, spoken to her with genuine curiosity rather than the condescension she had endured from the supposedly civilized men of the East. She shook herself. This was absurd. She had not come to Arizona to moon over mountain men. She had work to do. Over the following weeks, Willa threw herself into teaching with fierce determination. She stayed up late preparing lessons, incorporated practical skills alongside traditional academics, and slowly began to win over her students. When she noticed that many of the children struggled with reading, she started a lending library, carefully tracking which books went home with which students. When she discovered that several of her older pupils were needed on their family farms during planting and harvest, she adjusted the schedule to accommodate them. But the whispers continued. She heard them in the trading post at church whenever she walked through Fort Bowie's dusty streets. Too refined for this life. She would not last through a hard winter. What man would want a wife who reads more than she cooks? It was Martha Hayes who finally addressed it directly. She invited Willa to tea one Saturday afternoon, serving strong coffee and hard biscuits in her quarters above the trading post. "You have been doing well with the children," Martha said, pouring coffee into chipped mugs. "Sarah Cunningham told me her daughter has been reading at home, something she never did before you arrived. Emily is a bright girl. She simply needed encouragement." "Yes, well." Martha settled into her chair with a sigh. "I wanted to speak with you about the talk going around town. It has gotten worse, I'm afraid." Willa's stomach tightened. "What are they saying now?" "Harold Finch has been vocal in his opinion that you are too educated to be an effective frontier teacher. He says you are filling the children's heads with impractical knowledge instead of teaching them useful skills. Several mothers have expressed concern that you are encouraging their daughters to have ideas above their station." "Above their station?" Willa set down her mug with a sharp click. "Education is not about social station, Mrs. Hayes. It is about empowering individuals to think critically and engage meaningfully with the world." "I agree with you, dear. But you must understand how people think here. Life on the frontier is hard. Most families are simply trying to survive. They worry that education will make their children dissatisfied with frontier life, that they will want to leave for the cities back east. And what is wrong with wanting more from life? What is wrong with giving children the tools to choose their own path?" Martha's smile was sad. "Nothing in principle. But this is a small community, and it needs young people to stay and build it up. If all the educated children leave for Boston and New York, what happens to Fort Bowie?" Willa had no answer for that. The tension came to a head 3 weeks later during a school board meeting. Willa was summoned to attend, standing before Harold Finch and 4 other men who comprised the board. "Miss Brennan," Finch began, his tone grave, "we have received complaints about your teaching methods. Parents are concerned that you are focusing too heavily on academic subjects and neglecting practical skills." "I teach reading, writing, mathematics, history, and natural philosophy," Willa replied, keeping her voice level. "These are standard subjects for any school." "Perhaps in Boston," another board member interjected, "but Fort Bowie is not Boston. Our children need to learn skills that will help them survive on the frontier. They need to know how to work the land, tend animals, defend themselves. And I am not preventing them from learning those skills, but I also believe they deserve access to literature, to history, to the accumulated knowledge of human civilization. Why should frontier children be denied the same education available to children in the East?" "Because they are frontier children," Finch said bluntly. "Their lives will be different. Your education, Miss Brennan, while impressive, may have left you ill-equipped to understand their needs. You are too educated to truly grasp what frontier life requires, especially for women. A frontier wife needs to be practical, hardy, skilled in domestic arts, not buried in books. The words struck like a physical blow, too educated, as if knowledge were a failing rather than an asset. I see, Willa said quietly. And what would you have me do? Teach less? Limit my students' potential to match your limited expectations? The room erupted in outraged muttering. One board member stood abruptly. Now see here, that is uncalled for. Is it? Willa's hands were shaking, but she refused to back down. You have decided that these children are not capable of rigorous academic work because they were born on the frontier rather than in a city. You have decided that girls in particular should limit their aspirations to becoming frontier wives rather than pursuing their full potential. And you have decided that my education, rather than being an asset to this community, is somehow a liability. So I ask again, what would you have me do? Finch's face had gone red. We would have you show some humility and respect for our way of life, Miss Brennan. We would have you remember that you are here at our sufferance, and we can dismiss you just as easily as we hired you. The threat hung in the air. Willa forced herself to take a breath, to think past her anger. She needed this position. Without it, she had nowhere to go, no way to support herself. I apologize if my tone was disrespectful, she said, the words tasting like ash. But I stand by my conviction that all children deserve the best education possible. I am willing to incorporate more practical demonstrations into my lessons, but I will not lower my academic standards. The board members exchanged glances. Finally, Finch nodded curtly. Very well. We will revisit this matter in 3 months. In the meantime, I suggest you consider carefully whether you are truly suited for this position. Willa left the meeting with her head high and her heart sinking. She walked blindly through Fort Bowie streets, not caring where she was going, just needing to move. She found herself outside the fort's walls, standing at the edge of the desert as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red. They gave you trouble. She spun around to find Marcus Norwood standing a few yards away. He must have just returned from the mountains because he was wearing buckskin and carrying a rifle, a pack slung over those impossibly broad shoulders. Dust coated his clothes and his long hair was tied back with a leather cord. He looked wild and untamed, a part of the landscape itself. How did you know? She asked. Saw you leaving the meeting. You looked like you wanted to hit something. He set down his pack and rifle, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. What did they say? She should not confide in him. It was not proper. But the words spilled out anyway. They think I am too educated to be an effective teacher, too refined to understand frontier life. They implied that my education makes me unsuitable as a frontier wife, as if that has any bearing on my ability to teach children to read and write. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the darkening horizon. And what do you think? I think they are small-minded fools who cannot see past their own limitations. I think they would rather keep their children ignorant than allow them the opportunity to aspire to something more. I think they are threatened by the idea that a woman might have more education than they do. She stopped, appalled at her own vehemence. I apologize. That was inappropriate. Why? It is how you feel. Yes, but I should not burden you with my frustrations. He turned to face her fully, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed to glow. You are not a burden, Miss Brennan, and for what it is worth, I think you are right. Those men are fools. You do? Education is never wasted. Knowledge is power, whether you are living in a city or trapping in the mountains. I have survived this long because I learned from the land, from the animals, from the native tribes who know this desert better than any white man. That is education, just a different kind. He took a step closer. And as for you being too educated to be a frontier wife, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Despite everything, Willa felt a laugh bubble up. Is it? A smart woman is worth her weight in gold out here. She can help you plan, make decisions, solve problems. She can teach your children to think and read and understand the world. Why would any man want less than that? His gaze held hers. If a woman is too educated, that says more about the man's insecurity than the woman's worth. The words settled over her like a balm. Thank you, Mr. Norwood. Marcus, he said, if you are going to share your troubles with me, You might as well use my given name." "Then you should call me Willa." "Willa?" He said her name like he was tasting it. "It suits you. Strong and a little bit fierce." She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "I should return before dark. It would not do for the schoolteacher to be found wandering alone with a mountain man." Something flickered across his face. "No, I suppose it would not. Those same people who think you are too educated would have a lot to say about that." As she walked back to Fort Bowie, Willa could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Marcus Norwood saw her not as too much or too little, but simply as herself. And that was more intoxicating than any compliment she had ever received in Boston's drawing rooms. Over the following weeks, she found herself watching for Marcus around Fort Bowie. He stayed for nearly a month, the longest he had remained in civilization in years, according to Martha Hayes. Willa told herself it was coincidence that he always seemed to be near the schoolhouse when she dismissed her students, or that he happened to be at the trading post when she stopped to purchase supplies. But deep down, she knew better. He began walking her home after school, carrying her books despite her protests. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about life in the mountains, about tracking elk and setting trap lines, about sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She told him about Boston, about her father's library and her mother's literary salons, about the life she had left behind. "Do you miss it?" he asked one afternoon as they walked along the fort's walls. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the culture, the theaters and museums. I miss conversations about literature and philosophy. But I do not miss the pretension, the endless social rules and expectations. In Boston, I was always being judged and found wanting. Here, at least the judgment is honest." He laughed at that, a deep rumble that she felt in her chest. "I suppose that is one way to look at it. What about you? Do you ever wish you lived in a town, had a normal life?" "This is normal for me," he said simply. "The mountains are my home. I know every canyon and creek, every game trail and water source. I know when the snow will come and when the ice will break. That is my world." "It sounds lonely." He was quiet for a moment. "It has been, sometimes. But a man gets used to his own company." The unspoken question hung between them. Willa wanted to ask if he was lonely now, if he felt the same pull she did, but she did not dare. She was already on thin ice with the school board. Any hint of impropriety could cost her everything. But Martha Hayes noticed, as did the other women of Fort Bowie. The whispers took on a new quality. "Have you seen how that mountain man follows her around? Marcus Norwood has never shown interest in settling down before. What makes her so special?" "Well, she is educated. Maybe that appeals to him. A man like that needs a practical wife, not some Boston bluestocking." The school board meeting in December was even worse than the first. Finch opened with a litany of complaints. Willa was spending too much time on literature. She was encouraging girls to think beyond domestic duties. She was allowing students to question established ideas rather than simply memorizing facts. And there is another matter," Finch added, his tone ominous. "It has come to our attention that you have been keeping company with Marcus Norwood, unchaperoned company." Willa's heart sank. "Mr. Norwood occasionally walks me home from the schoolhouse. We walk along public streets in full view of everyone. There's been nothing improper in our interactions." Improper or not, it gives the appearance of impropriety. A schoolteacher must be above reproach. Your association with a mountain man, a man who lives outside civilized society, reflects poorly on this school and this community. "Marcus Norwood is a good man," Willa said hotly. "He has treated me with nothing but respect and kindness, far more than I have received from supposedly civilized members of this community." The board members reacted as if she had slapped them. One man stood abruptly. "That is quite enough, Miss Brennan. Your attitude has been the subject of much discussion. You are contrary, opinionated, and unwilling to adapt to frontier ways. Perhaps it is time to admit that this position is not suitable for someone of your background." "You mean someone of my education," Willa shot back. "You have never wanted me here. You hired me because you were desperate, and now you are looking for any excuse to dismiss me." "If we dismiss you, it will be because you are not suited for this position," Finch said coldly. "You are too educated, too refined, too set in your Eastern ways to understand what Fort Bowie needs. and your association with Marcus Norwood only confirms that you lack the judgment required of a schoolteacher." "Then dismiss me," Willa said, her voice shaking with fury. "But do not pretend it is about my teaching. My students are learning. They are reading and writing and thinking critically. You simply cannot tolerate a woman who refuses to make herself smaller to accommodate your narrow worldview." She left before they could respond, walking blindly through the December darkness. She found herself at the edge of the fort again, staring out at the mountains silhouetted against the stars. "They are going to dismiss you." Marcus emerged from the shadows like a ghost. In the moonlight, his face was all hard planes and angles, beautiful in its ruggedness. "You heard." "I was in the trading post. Word travels fast." He moved to stand beside her. "What will you do?" "I do not know," she admitted. "Return to Boston, I suppose. Try to find another teaching position. Hope my stepfather has not completely destroyed my mother's affection for me." "Or you could stay." She turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "Stay? Marcus, they are going to dismiss me. I would have no position, no income. How could I possibly stay?" "You could marry me." The words hung in the cold desert air. Willa stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. And now she could see the tension in his powerful frame, the uncertainty in those light brown eyes. "I know it is sudden. I know I am not what you are accustomed to. But I care for you, Willa. These past weeks, talking with you, learning from you, they have been the best of my life. You make me want to be more than just a mountain man scraping by in the wilderness." "Marcus, Wait. Let me finish." He took a breath. "I do not have much to offer. I have a cabin in the mountains, a good trap line, some money saved. I can provide for you, keep you safe, and you could teach me. All those things in your books, all that knowledge you have, you could share it with me. They said you were too educated to be a frontier wife, but I say you would teach me plenty. I want to learn, Willa. I want to know everything you know, and I want you by my side while I do it." Willa's mind reeled. Marriage. To Marcus Norwood. It was insane. They had known each other for less than 2 months. He lived in the wilderness, far from civilization. She would be giving up everything she had worked for, everything she had been. But what had she been, really? A woman tolerated, but never truly accepted. A teacher dismissed for having too much knowledge, an outsider in every place she had ever lived. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him. He was strong and capable, yes, but there was kindness in his eyes, intelligence in the questions he asked. He had never once made her feel like her education was a burden or a flaw. Instead, he valued it, wanted to share in it, and she cared for him more than cared. In his presence, she felt seen in a way she never had before, not as too much or too little, but as exactly enough. "Yes," she heard herself say, "yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the desert. He reached for her, his large hands gentle as they cupped her face. "Are you certain? I know this is not the life you planned." "I am certain," she said, and realized it was true. "None of my plans have worked out the way I expected. Maybe it is time to stop planning and start living." He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious. Willa felt heat bloom through her entire body, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathless. "When?" she managed. "As soon as possible, before the school board can cause more trouble. We can get married here at the fort, then head up to my cabin before winter sets in hard." "The cabin is far?" 2 days' ride into the mountains. It is remote but beautiful, and we would have privacy. Time to get to know each other better." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I want to give you time, Willa. I know this is fast, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." They were married 3 days later in the fort's chapel. Martha Hayes served as Willa's witness, her eyes bright with tears. Harold Finch attended with a sour expression, clearly displeased at losing the opportunity to dismiss her officially. The other townspeople showed a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Willa wore her best dress, a blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes. Marcus had cleaned up, his long hair neatly combed, his buckskin replaced with new trousers and a white shirt that stretched tight across his muscled chest and shoulders. He looked uncomfortable in the civilized clothing, but when his eyes met hers, she saw only warmth and certainty. The ceremony was brief. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. This was real. She was married to a mountain man, about to leave civilization for a cabin in the wilderness. As they left the chapel, Harold Finch stopped them. "I hope you know what you are doing, Miss Brennan." "Mrs. Norwood, I suppose I should say now. Marcus is a good man in his way, but mountain life is hard. You're giving up everything you worked for." "No," Willa said firmly. "I am gaining something far more valuable. A partner who values my mind as much as my other qualities, a life of my own choosing, and the freedom to be exactly who I am." Finch shook his head. "You are too educated to understand what you are losing. And you, Mr. Finch, are too narrow-minded to see what I am gaining." Marcus laughed outright at that, the sound booming through the cold December air. He swept Willa up in his arms, making her squeal in surprise. "That is my wife," he announced to the gathered crowd. "Smart as a whip and fierce as a mountain lion. Any man would be lucky to have her." They spent their wedding night in Willa's small room behind the schoolhouse. Marcus was gentle and patient, taking time to learn what pleased her, murmuring endearments against her skin. Willa discovered that her educated mind had not prepared her at all for the intensity of physical intimacy, for the way Marcus's hands could make her forget every book she had ever read. But she was a quick study, and by the time dawn broke, they were both thoroughly satisfied. The next morning, they loaded Willa's belongings onto a sturdy mule. Most of her dresses had to be left behind, impractical for mountain life. But her books came with them, carefully wrapped and packed. Marcus had insisted. "You are teaching me to read properly," he said. "We will need all those books." The ride into the mountains was grueling. Willa had never spent much time on horseback, and by the end of the first day, every muscle in her body ached. But Marcus was attentive, helping her dismount, rubbing her sore shoulders, making camp with the efficiency of long practice. That night, they slept under the stars, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms. Willa stared up at the vast sky, overwhelmed by the number of stars visible away from the fort's lights. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Wait until you see the cabin," Marcus said. "It sits in a valley with mountains all around. There's a stream with trout so thick you can practically catch them with your hands. Elk come down from the high country in winter, and the sunsets turn the whole sky red and gold. It sounds like paradise." "It will be, now that you are here." They reached the cabin late the second day. It was larger than Willa had expected, a solid structure of logs and stone set in a clearing surrounded by pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and for a moment she was confused before remembering that Marcus would have left a fire banked. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. One large room served as living space and kitchen, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A ladder led to a sleeping loft. The furniture was rough but well made, clearly crafted by Marcus's own hands. "It is not much," he said, watching her face anxiously, "but it is warm and dry and safe." "It is wonderful," Willa said honestly. "It is ours." Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Marcus taught Willa the skills she needed to survive in the mountains. She learned to shoot, to track game, to recognize edible plants and dangerous animals. She learned to cook over an open fire and preserve meat for winter. Her hands, once soft and uncalloused, grew strong from work. In turn, she taught Marcus to read in earnest. They started with simple primers, but he learned with astonishing speed, his quick mind soaking up knowledge like the dry desert soaked up rain. Within weeks, he was reading her novels aloud to her in the evenings, his deep voice bringing the words to life. "Listen to this," he said one night, reading from Thoreau. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." He lowered the book, his eyes shining. "That is exactly it, Willa. That is what I have been trying to say about mountain life, living deliberately, facing essential facts." "You are a natural philosopher," she said, delighted. "You have been living Thoreau's principles without ever reading his words. And now I get to read them too, thanks to you." He pulled her close, the book forgotten. "You have given me so much, Willa. A whole world I never knew existed." "And you have given me freedom," she replied. freedom to be myself without apology, freedom to use my mind and my hands. You never once made me feel like I was too much or too little." "Because you are exactly right," he said simply. "Perfect, just as you are." Winter in the mountains was harsh but beautiful. Snow piled high around the cabin, and temperatures dropped far below freezing. But inside, they were warm and safe. Marcus's preparations proved thorough. They had plenty of firewood, preserved food, and each other. Willa had never been happier. The work was hard, yes, but satisfying in a way that teaching had never been. And her mind was still engaged, still learning. Marcus proved an eager student, asking questions that pushed her to think more deeply about the book she had always taken for granted. "Why did Hamlet hesitate?" he asked one night after they finished reading the play together. "That is one of the great questions of literature," Willa said. "Scholars have debated it for centuries." "But what do you think?" she considered. "I think he was paralyzed by thought. He had too much education, too much philosophy. It made him question everything, even clear moral duties." "Like the people who said you were too educated," Marcus observed. "They thought knowledge made you weak, unable to act. But you were not hesitant when I proposed. You made a choice and committed to it." "Because I trusted my heart as well as my head," Willa said. "Hamlet's tragedy was that he lived entirely in his mind, but I have learned that true wisdom requires both thought and feeling, both education and instinct." "Then teach me that," Marcus said. "Teach me to balance both." They made love that night with slow tenderness, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention they brought to books and wilderness skills. Afterward, wrapped in quilts in the loft, Willa felt a contentment she had never known. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing carpets of wildflowers. Animals emerged from winter dens, and Willa discovered she was pregnant. "Are you pleased?" she asked Marcus nervously. They had not discussed children, too caught up in building their life together. His face lit up with joy so profound it took her breath away. "Pleased? Willa, I'm overwhelmed. A child, our child." He placed his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby who will grow up with both book learning and wilderness skills, who will be able to read Shakespeare and track elk." "Quite the combination," Willa said, laughing. "The best of both worlds," Marcus agreed. "Just like us." The pregnancy was not easy. Morning sickness plagued her through the spring. The summer heat, even in the mountains, made her uncomfortable. But Marcus was attentive and patient, taking over the heavier chores, making sure she rested. In quiet moments, he read to her from her books, or she taught him about mathematics and history. His understanding deepened with every lesson. He could now discuss philosophy and literature with the same confidence he brought to tracking and trapping. "Do you ever regret leaving Fort Bowie?" he asked one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Not once," Willa said honestly. "I thought teaching was my calling, but this is so much richer. I'm still teaching, still learning, but without the constraints and judgment, and I have you. That alone would make every sacrifice worthwhile." "You gave up a lot for me," Marcus said quietly. "Your career, your independence, the respect of the community." "I gave up people who saw my education as a flaw," Willa corrected. "I gave up a community that wanted me to be less than I was. What I gained was immeasurably more valuable. A partner who celebrates my mind, a life of purpose and meaning, the freedom to be fully myself." "You have taught me so much," Marcus said. "Not just reading and history, but how to think differently, how to question assumptions, how to see the world through new eyes." "And you have taught me that education is not just about books," Willa replied. "You know more about this land, about survival and seasons and the interconnection of all living things, than any professor I studied under. Your knowledge is just as valuable as mine, just differently focused." He pulled her close, his strong arms a shelter and a home. "Then we will teach our child both, book learning and wilderness wisdom. They will be able to choose their own path, whether that is in the mountains or in the cities." Their son was born in early October, delivered with the help of a Navajo woman Marcus knew from his years in the mountains. The labor was long and difficult, but when Willa finally held her baby boy, all the pain was forgotten. "He is perfect," Marcus breathed, touching the infant's tiny hand with one calloused finger. "Look at him, Willa. We made this. Together." They named him William, after Willa's father, with the middle name Storm, for the thunderstorm that raged the night he was born. Little William had his father's light brown eyes and his mother's determined expression. Parenthood brought new challenges and new joys. Willa learned to balance caring for an infant with the demands of mountain life. Marcus proved a devoted father, wearing William in a sling against his broad chest as he completed his daily tasks, talking to the baby constantly about the world around them. "See that track?" he said to 3-month-old William, crouched beside a print in the snow. "That is from a mountain lion. See how you can count the pads? And there is no claw marks because cats retract their claws when they walk." Willa watched from the cabin doorway, her heart full. This was what she had been meant for. Not the constrained life of a Boston spinster or the judged existence of a frontier schoolteacher, but this wild, free life with a man who valued every part of her. When William was 6 months old, they made their first trip back to Fort Bowie for supplies. Willa had been nervous about the reception they would receive, but Marcus simply squeezed her hand. "Hold your head high," he said. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." The changes to Fort Bowie were immediately apparent. A new school building had been constructed, larger and better equipped than the old one, and the teacher, Willa learned from Martha Hayes, was a young man from New Mexico with minimal education himself. "The children are not learning nearly as much as they did with you," Martha confided over coffee in the Trading Post. "He can barely read himself. But he is a man, and he does not challenge anyone's ideas about what frontier children need, so the board is satisfied." "And the children?" Willa asked. Martha's expression was sad. "They miss you, especially the girls. Several of them have asked me about you, wondering if you are well, if you are happy." "Tell them I am very happy," Willa said firmly. "Tell them I found a life that values all of me, not just the parts that make others comfortable. And tell them that they should never make themselves smaller to fit someone else's expectations." News of their return spread quickly. Several of her former students came to see her, their faces lighting up when they saw baby William. "Mrs. Norwood," Emily Cunningham breathed, "you have a baby, and you look so different." Willa knew what she meant. The refined Boston teacher was gone, replaced by a woman in practical wool and leather, her face tanned by sun and wind, her hands strong from work. But her eyes were bright with happiness, and that was what truly showed. "I am different," Willa agreed. "I am myself now, fully and completely." Even Harold Finch stopped by the Trading Post while they were there. He looked older, more haggard. "Mrs. Norwood," he said stiffly, "I see mountain life agrees with you." "It does," Willa said pleasantly. "My husband and I are very happy." Finch glanced at Marcus, who was holding William and examining a new steel trap with the focused attention he brought to everything. "I suppose I owe you an apology. We were wrong about you, not about you being too educated," he added quickly, "but about what that meant. We thought your education would make you unable to adapt to frontier life. Instead, you adapted in ways we never imagined." "Education is not about limitations, Mr. Finch," Willa said. "It is about possibilities. I hope someday Fort Bowie will have a school that understands that." They returned to the mountains laden with supplies and news. As they rode up the familiar trails, Willa felt the tension she had been carrying ease. Fort Bowie was no longer her home. Her home was a cabin in a mountain valley with a husband who valued her mind and a son who would grow up understanding that education and wilderness skills were equally valuable. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons. William grew strong and curious, learning to read at his mother's knee and to track and hunt at his father's side. When he was 3, he had a sister, Eleanor, who inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's fearless spirit. Marcus continued his studies, reading everything Willa had brought and asking for more. They made twice-yearly trips to Fort Bowie for supplies, and each time Marcus purchased books: history, philosophy, science, literature. His small cabin library grew until it rivaled collections in much larger homes. "I never knew there was so much to learn," he said one night, looking up from a book on astronomy. "All those years in the mountains, I was looking at the stars and never understanding what they were." "You understood them as a trapper and guide," Willa reminded him. You use them for navigation, marked seasons by their positions. That is understanding too. But now I know they are suns like ours, impossibly far away. I know about planets and galaxies. It makes me feel small and large at the same time. Small because the universe is so vast, but large because I can comprehend it. He set down the book and pulled her close. You gave me that gift, Willa, the gift of wonder and understanding. And you gave me the gift of belonging, she replied, of being valued for exactly who I am. I spent my whole life being told I was too much or too little, too educated for a frontier wife, too female for serious scholarship, too ambitious for a woman. But you never once asked me to be anything other than myself. Because yourself is extraordinary, Marcus said simply. When William was 7 and Eleanor 4, they had another addition to the family. Twin boys this time, Matthew and Martin, who kept their parents exhausted and entertained in equal measure. 4 children, Willa said, looking at their cabin bursting with life and noise. In Boston, I thought I would die a spinster. Now look at me. I am looking, Marcus said, his eyes warm. And I see a woman who is thriving, a woman who teaches her children to think and question and learn, a woman who can shoot a deer at 100 yards and discuss Plato's Republic, a woman who was supposedly too educated to be a frontier wife, but who has built the best frontier life I have ever seen. That summer, they received an unexpected visitor. Martha Hayes made the difficult journey to their cabin, bringing news from Fort Bowie. The school board has asked me to extend an invitation, she said over dinner. They want you to return as a teacher. Willa stared at her. They want me to return? After they spent so much effort convincing me I was unsuitable? Things have changed, Martha said. The new teacher left last year. They have had 3 replacements since then, none lasting more than a few months. The children are falling further behind. Several families are considering moving to larger towns so their children can receive proper education. And they think I would be willing to return after how they treated me? Martha smiled slightly. I think they are desperate enough to hope so. They are prepared to offer significantly better terms. Higher salary, better accommodations, and full autonomy over curriculum. Willa looked at Marcus, who was watching her carefully. What do you think? She asked. I think it is your decision, he said. If you want to teach again, we could make it work. Move back to Fort Bowie, at least during the school year. Willa considered it. Teaching again. Using her education to help children learn and grow. It was tempting. But then she looked around the cabin, at William reading to his little sister, at the twins playing with wooden animals Marcus had carved, at the books lining the walls, at the life they had built together. Thank you, she said to Martha. But no, my teaching is here now. My children, my husband, the future we are building together. I am not willing to give that up to prove a point to people who should have valued me from the start. Martha nodded, as if she had expected this answer. I understand, but I had to ask. And Willa, I want you to know that many of us regret how you were treated. You were an excellent teacher. We lost something valuable when you left. After Martha departed, Marcus pulled Willa into his arms. Are you certain? I know teaching was important to you. It was, Willa agreed. But this is more important. Our family, our life here. And I am still teaching, Marcus. I'm teaching our children. I'm teaching you. That's enough. Then teach me something new, he said with a smile. There is still so much I want to learn. They settled by the fire with one of the new books he had purchased on their last trip to Fort Bowie. It was a volume of poetry by Walt Whitman, and they took turns reading aloud, discussing the meaning and imagery. I celebrate myself and sing myself, Marcus read. And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. He looked up from the page. Is that not what we have done? Celebrated ourselves as we are? Shared everything between us? Yes, Willa said softly. That's exactly what we have done. You never asked me to be less educated. I never asked you to be more civilized. We celebrated each other exactly as we were, and built something new together. They said you were too educated for a frontier wife, Marcus said, setting the book aside and pulling her close. And I said you would teach me plenty. I was right. You have taught me to read, to think, to see the world with new eyes. But more than that, You have taught me that love is not about one person diminishing themselves to fit the other's expectations. It is about two people growing together, learning from each other, becoming more than they could ever be alone." Willa kissed him, slow and deep. After all these years, his touch still sent shivers through her. "And you have taught me that education is not just what comes from books. You have taught me about the land, about survival, about living deliberately and authentically. You have taught me that being valued for my mind is not too much to ask from a partner." That night, with their children sleeping peacefully in the loft and the fire burning low, they made love with the easy familiarity of long partnership and the enduring passion that had drawn them together. Afterward, wrapped in quilts and each other, they talked until dawn about dreams and plans, about the future they were building for their children. "William wants to be a doctor," Marcus said. "He's been reading that medical text we purchased and asking me about anatomy." "We could send him to school in California when he is older," Willa suggested. "Let him get formal training." "And if he wants to come back here to practice?" "Then he comes back. We give our children the education and the freedom to choose their own paths. Whether that is in the mountains or the cities, that is for them to decide." The years continued to flow like the stream beside their cabin. William did indeed become a doctor, studying in San Francisco before returning to open a practice in Fort Bowie. He married a teacher from back east, a woman who reminded Willa very much of her younger self. Eleanor became a botanist, studying the medicinal plants of the Southwest and writing papers that were published in scientific journals. She married a fellow scientist and split her time between the mountains and the university in Arizona where she taught. The twins followed their father's path, becoming guides and trappers, but with the added advantage of their mother's education. They could speak with scientists and scholars about the natural world in ways that previous generations of mountain men never could. And Marcus and Willa grew old together in their mountain cabin, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by books and by the wilderness they both loved. On their 40th anniversary, Marcus presented Willa with a gift. It was a leather-bound journal filled with his writing, essays on the mountains, on the changing seasons, on the animals and plants he had observed over decades of living deliberately in the wilderness. "You taught me to read," he said, "so I thought I should write something worthy of the effort." Willa opened the journal with trembling hands, reading his careful script. The observations were keen, the writing clear and evocative. It was the work of an educated mind, but one educated in both books and wilderness. "Marcus, this is beautiful. You should have it published." "Maybe," he said with a shrug. "Or maybe it is just for us, for our children and grandchildren, a record of what we built together." That evening, they sat on the porch they had added to the cabin years ago, watching the sun set over the mountains. Willa's hair was white now, Marcus's long hair streaked with silver, but their hands remained clasped together as they had been for 4 decades. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Boston?" Marcus asked. "If you had never come to Fort Bowie?" "Sometimes," Willa admitted. "I probably would have found another teaching position eventually. Lived as a respectable spinster, respected but alone. Perhaps I would have been content in a way. But I would never have been truly happy. I would never have known what it felt like to be valued for all of myself, not just the parts that made others comfortable. I would never have had you, or our children, or this life we built together." She squeezed his hand. "They said I was too educated for a frontier wife. They meant it as a condemnation, but it became the foundation of our happiness. Because you did not want me to be less educated. You wanted to learn from me, to grow with me. And you taught me plenty," Marcus said with a smile, "just like I promised you would." "We taught each other," Willa corrected. "That is what the best partnerships are. Not one person diminishing themselves for the other, but both people lifting each other higher." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars they had watched together for 40 years. The wilderness around them was alive with sound, owls hooting, coyotes calling, the wind sighing through the pines. "I love you," Marcus said quietly. "From that first day when you stood in that schoolhouse surrounded by your books, I knew you were extraordinary. I've never stopped being grateful that you chose me." "And I love you," Willa replied, "for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for valuing my mind when others saw it as a flaw, for building a life with me where I could be fully myself. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." In the years that followed, their story became legend in Fort Bowie and throughout the Arizona Territory. The two-educated Boston teacher and the mountain man who said she would teach him plenty, who built a life together that defied every expectation. Their children and grandchildren carried forward their legacy, proving that education and wilderness skills, refinement and ruggedness could coexist beautifully. When Marcus passed away in his sleep at the age of 87, Willa held his hand and whispered, "Thank you for 43 years of love and learning." She followed him 6 months later, as if unable to bear separation after so long together. They were buried side by side in a clearing near their cabin under the wide Arizona sky they had loved. Their grandchildren carved their headstones with simple words that captured the essence of their unlikely love story. Marcus Norwood, mountain man and scholar, he found education in the wilderness and in the woman he loved. Willa Brennan Norwood, teacher and pioneer. She was never too educated to love fully and live freely. Their cabin became a gathering place for the family, preserved exactly as Marcus and Willa had left it. The books still lined the walls, Marcus's journal sat on the table, and the spirit of two people who had refused to accept the limitations others placed on them lived on in every corner. And on clear nights, when the grandchildren gathered on the porch to watch the stars, they told stories about the remarkable woman who was told she was too educated for frontier life, and the mountain man who said she would teach him plenty, and how together they built something more beautiful and lasting than either could have created alone. Their love story became a reminder that true partnership requires celebrating each other fully, that education is never wasted, and that the best loves are the ones where both people grow into the fullness of who they were meant to be. It was a testament to choosing authenticity over acceptance, passion over propriety, and building a life on mutual respect and endless curiosity. The mountains stood eternal witness to their legacy, and in the whisper of wind through pine trees, in the call of eagles overhead, in the rush of the stream beside the cabin, their love continued to echo through the generations. A reminder that being too educated, too passionate, too fully yourself is never a flaw when you find the right person to share your life with.